I thought that having a child would make my parents grow even more distant. For months they looked down on me as if I wasn't there. But they finally saw me and everything started to change. When she cried, "My name's Riley. I'm 18, I live in a small town in northern Illinois, and I was halfway through my first semester at community college when everything cracked open. I work weekends at a diner just off Route 9, the kind with crack booths, the smell of old grease and regulars who tip in coins. I was studying early childhood education, which feels a little ironic now. I didn't have big plans, just finish school, maybe transfer to a state college later. Life quiet. Nothing complicated. But life doesn't wait for plans. I told my parents on a Sunday. It was raining, not the soft movie kind rain. It was cold, heavy, and messy. Like the kind that turns to slush and makes your socks wet through your boots. I sat at the edge of the living room couch like I was 12 again, knees together, heart pounding. Mom was folding towels, humming to herself, something she does when she's nervous. Dad was in his recliner, watching a war documentary with the volume too low to follow, too loud to ignore. I waited until a commercial came on. I thought maybe the break in noise would make it easier. I said it quiet but clear, "I'm pregnant." They both froze. Like someone hit pause on the whole room. For a second, the only sound was the buzz of the fridge. Mom dropped the towel in her lap. Her eyes didn't blink. Dad just stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Then Mom's mouth opened, but no words came, just the soft gasp. Her face broke before her voice did. She started crying. Quietly, like she didn't want to. Her hands shaking in her lap. Dad stood up without a word, walked past me like I wasn't even there, and disappeared down the hallway. The bedroom door clicked shut behind him. That soft, final little click? It felt like something ending. That was the last time he looked me in the eye for 3 months. Mom stayed. She sat there crying for a while and I just waited. I didn't know what to do. My palms were sweating. My chest felt like it was being held shut from the inside. Eventually she asked, "How far along?" I told her. 5 months. She flinched. "And you're just telling us now?" I didn't know how to say I'd been scared. That every time I almost brought it up, something made me stop. I told myself I'd do it next week for 2 straight months. But the belly was growing. The kicks were starting. I couldn't hide anymore. She wiped her face and stood up. She didn't say anything else. Just went into the kitchen and started scrubbing a perfectly clean counter. Like if she could just scrub hard enough, she'd erase the news. After that, the house felt different. Cold, but not because of the weather. Cold like a place where you aren't welcome anymore. Dad avoided me completely. If I came into the kitchen, he left. If he saw me in the hallway, he looked down. He didn't shout, didn't curse, just shut me out. Like silence was punishment enough. Mom spoke only in logistics. "Dinner's on the stove. Don't forget your shift." Doctor called. No more good mornings. No more "How was school?" or "Do you need anything?" Just the bare minimum. I thought maybe showing them a sonogram would help. Like seeing her, my daughter, might make it real. Might soften something. I left the photo on the kitchen table. The next morning it was gone. No one said a word. I started sleeping more. Staying in my room. Watching videos on my phone just to fill the quiet. At school I lied to my professors and friends. Said my family was adjusting. Said they were just processing. But I knew. They weren't adjusting. They were ashamed. Ashamed of me. Of what people would say. Of how it looked. And I was ashamed of how much that still mattered to me. I wanted to be strong. Independent. But in that house I felt like a shadow of myself. A mistake walking on eggshells. And yet, late at night, when she kicked the light, fluttery, like tiny waves, I would place my hand on my belly and whisper, "I've got you." Because no one else did. It's strange how silence can be louder than shouting. I thought if my parents had screamed at me, if my dad had slammed a door or my mom had called me reckless, it would have hurt, but at least it would have been something. Something I could fight back against. Instead, I got silence. Cold, consistent, unforgiving silence. The kind that makes your bones ache. At school, I stopped sitting with anyone during lunch. Not because they said anything they didn't. That was the problem. They stopped asking me questions. They smiled less. Talked to each other in lower voices when I passed. One day, I overheard someone say, "She's keeping it," like I was a rumor, not a person. I walked out in the middle of class that afternoon. Just grabbed my bag and left. Nobody stopped me. I sat in the diner parking lot for 2 hours, crying into my steering wheel until my shift started. When I got home that night, the porch light was off. It had never been off before. Not once. Even when I stayed out late after graduation, even when Dad was mad at me for curfews, it was always on. Always. That night it was dark. I stood there, shivering with my hand on the doorknob, belly beginning to press against my hoodie, and I realized I didn't live in this house anymore. Not really. I just existed there. Inside, Dad was asleep in his recliner with the TV still on like always. But he didn't stir when I came in. Didn't glance at me. Didn't ask if I'd eaten. He just kept breathing loud and steady like I wasn't real. Mom had left a plate on the stove with plastic wrap over it. Her note just said, "Don't forget your vitamins." No love, no we'll figure it out, not even I'm tired. Just an instruction. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan and felt like the only person in the world. I could feel her, the baby, moving inside me. Like a soft flutter under my skin. She didn't know how complicated things were yet. She was just alive, trusting me. And I hated that I couldn't even give her a family who'd care she existed. A few days later, I went to my first prenatal class alone. The room was full of couples. Partners with notebooks, women with husbands rubbing their backs, and me with my thrift store water bottle and a pen that barely worked. When the instructor said, "Turn to your support person," I pretended to tie my shoe so I wouldn't look like the only one without one. Afterward, a girl named Lexi came up to me. She looked maybe a year or two older than me, bright pink hair tied in a messy bun. She didn't ask about the father or my family. She just said, "Your shoes are cute," and gave me a granola bar. I almost cried. Over a granola bar. That's how low I was. We started sitting together after that. Lexi talked a lot, about her sister, about baby names, about how she craved orange juice like it was oxygen. She didn't ask for anything in return. She just sat with me, and that was enough. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone sat with me without making me feel like I needed to explain myself. At home, nothing changed. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Dad still didn't speak to me. Not a word. Not even when I passed him the salt one night at dinner and he took it without looking. Not even when I got up coughing one night and he saw me leaning over the sink, holding my belly like it would break. Mom did the bare minimum, drove me to appointments if I asked, made food, cleaned. But she never touched my stomach. Never said the word baby. It was like if she didn't say it, it wouldn't be real. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't watching. Not with hate. Not even anger. Just disappointment. And something deeper. Like she didn't know how we got here. Once, late at night, I heard her crying in the laundry room again. But I didn't go in. I couldn't. I didn't have the strength to comfort someone who couldn't even say my name when she looked at me. My belly kept growing. Slowly but surely. My jeans stopped fitting. My feet started swelling. The world kept moving forward, even as everything around me stood still. Sometimes I press my hand to my stomach and whisper things just to feel like someone was listening. "I'm sorry you have to come into the world like this. I don't know how we'll make it work, but I swear I'll try. You're not a mistake, even if no one else sees you." She kicked once hard right under my ribs. Like she was saying, "I hear you." And maybe that was the first time in weeks I didn't feel entirely alone. The first time my dad spoke to me again, it wasn't because he wanted to. It was because he couldn't ignore me anymore. I had been having these strange pains in my lower back, nothing too intense, but sharp enough to make me pause when I walked. I thought it was just normal pregnancy stuff. Lexi said she got them too, and her doctor told her it was the baby settling lower. But that night, it felt different. It started slow. A low, pulling ache that wrapped around my sides like a belt made of heat and pressure. Then sharper. Deeper. I remember grabbing the kitchen counter and just holding on. Breathing hard through my nose, willing the pain to pass. Mom was upstairs. Dad was in the living room, watching TV per usual. I didn't want to ask him. I didn't want to need anything from him. But when the pain didn't stop after 10 minutes and then came back harder like a wave knocking me over from the inside, I called out. "Dad?" Silence. "Dad, can you come here?" Still nothing. I could hear the TV, hear his chair creak as he shifted. He was pretending not to hear me. I hated that I knew his tricks. I swallowed my pride. "Please." The next sound I heard was his heavy footsteps. Reluctant. Like he was being dragged by something heavier than his own legs. He came into the kitchen and stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "What's going on?" he asked flatly. I was bent over the sink, one hand pressed against the side of my belly. "I think something's wrong." His eyes dropped to my stomach for the first time in months. It was like seeing him register the pregnancy in real time. his jaw clenched. Like what? I don't know, I said, and immediately felt stupid. It hurts. He didn't ask anything else. Just turned around and shouted, Karen. My mom's name, like I was a problem he didn't want to deal with. She came downstairs quickly, hair pulled up, face pale. The moment she saw me clutching the counter, something in her changed. She didn't ask questions. She just grabbed her purse, threw on a jacket, and said, We're going. Dad didn't follow us. He went back to his chair. We drove to the ER in silence except for my breathing. They hooked me up to monitors, checked everything. False labor, they said. Braxton Hicks contractions. Normal but painful. I nodded like I understood, but inside I was unraveling. Mom sat in the corner, arms folded, not looking at me. When the nurse asked if I wanted her in the room during the ultrasound, I said no. I didn't want to be pitted. I didn't want her there because I knew she wasn't really with me. I watched the screen alone as the tech checked everything. The baby was fine. Heartbeat strong. Tiny hands flexing like she was dreaming. I blinked hard to keep the tears from falling. Not because of the pain. Not because of the scare. Because I'd never felt so invisible and yet so full at the same time. The next day, Dad knocked on my bedroom door. Just once. Then opened it without waiting. I was lying on my side, knees pulled up, one hand resting on my belly like a shield. He stood in the doorway and didn't sit. I don't know what you expect from us, he said. I didn't answer. You drop this on us, then act like we're the ones who failed. Still, I didn't speak. I knew whatever I said would be wrong. He exhaled, annoyed. Your mom's not sleeping. She's worried sick. And I don't even know what to do with this. With me, you mean, I said quietly. He didn't deny it. You think this is easy for me? I added. Living in this house like I'm some stranger who broke the rules? You did break the rules, he said, his voice sharp. You went and got pregnant before you even figured your own life out. I made a mistake, I said. But she's not a mistake. He looked away. That was the closest we got to a conversation in months. He left without saying goodbye. But the door didn't slam. That meant something, I guess. Lexi was the first person I told about the hospital scare. She texted me that night after class and asked how I was doing. I almost said fine. Almost brushed it off like I always did. But then I typed I thought I was going into labor last night, and sent it. Her reply came fast. Holy SHT. Are you okay? Asterisk. I told her everything. Every single thing. The pain, the silence, my dad standing in the doorway like I was a problem to solve, not a daughter to care for. She sent a dozen voice notes in response, rambling and swearing and trying to make me laugh. And I did laugh. For the first time in what felt like weeks. She told me that even if my family was trash, she wasn't. That I wasn't alone. It's weird how someone you met 6 weeks ago can feel more like home than people you've lived with your whole life. That weekend, I skipped dinner. I stayed in my room, curtains closed, fan humming. Mom knocked around 8 and asked if I wanted anything. I said no. 10 minutes later, she left the plate outside my door anyway. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked it up, sat on the floor, and ate the cold mashed potatoes in silence. It didn't taste like forgiveness. But it also didn't taste like rejection. Just something in between. By the time I hit 32 weeks, I'd stopped trying to earn their affection. I still lived under their roof, still took my shoes off by the front door like always, still did my own laundry and tried not to leave dishes in the sink. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Like I'd moved into my body but left my heart packed in a box under the bed. I counted kicks at night and played soft music against my belly like the internet said to. I talked to her sometimes like a pen pal I hadn't met yet. I didn't say big things, just whispered the kind of truths I couldn't say out loud to anyone else. That I was scared. That I was tired. That I didn't know who I'd be once she arrived. That sometimes I missed who I used to be even if that girl had no idea what was coming. Mom started checking in more after the hospital scare. Not emotionally, but logistically. She'd ask if I'd taken my vitamins. If I had another appointment coming up. If I needed more prenatal tea. She made me oatmeal one morning and left it on the stove without a word. It was the first time in months I hadn't made my own breakfast. But she still didn't talk about the baby like she was real. She never said her name. Never asked if I had one. I did. I'd had her for weeks. Her name was Junie. Short for June, the month she was due. It felt like a secret I wasn't allowed to say out loud. One morning I came downstairs and found a folded stack of baby clothes on the counter. Onesies, soft pink and white, with tiny stars. They smelled faintly like lemon detergent and attic dust, like they'd been packed away for years. I recognized them. They were mine. I picked them up slowly as if they might dissolve in my hands. Some had little stains, some loose threads. I held one to my chest and blinked hard, trying not to cry. Mom walked in behind me, holding her mug. I kept the ones that were still good, she said, her voice soft. I turned to her. She wasn't smiling. Just tired. Thanks, I said. She nodded. Then added, it's not what I imagined, you know. Not like this. I nodded too. Me neither. She didn't say anything else. Just turned around and walked back upstairs. But that was the closest we'd come to being honest in months. Dad was still a ghost. A presence in the background. I could hear him in the house, footsteps, coughs, drawers opening and closing, but he never came near. If he passed me in the hallway, he looked at his shoes. Once I caught him looking at the nursery catalog I left on the coffee table. He picked it up, flipped through a few pages, then slid it under a pile of magazines like it hadn't happened. Sometimes I thought about confronting him, demanding he say something, anything. Ask about the baby. Ask if I was okay. But I didn't. I was too tired to dig into walls that thick. Instead, I focused on small victories, like getting through a whole night without crying, or finally being able to bend down and tie my shoes without gasping, or the day Lexi gave me a used crib. It was scratched and missing a wheel, but it came with a mattress and a whole bag of tiny blankets. We spent the afternoon putting it together in the corner of my room while 90s jams played from her phone. We laughed over how confusing the instructions were. At one point, we just sat on the floor eating popsicles and talking about things we'd never say to our parents. She said, "You're gonna be a good mom, Riley." I didn't answer right away. Then I whispered, "I hope so." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You already are." That night, I stood in my doorway and stared at the crib. The room was dim, just a soft orange glow from the streetlight outside. Everything felt fragile. Like if I breathed too hard, it would fall apart. Then something happened I still don't fully understand. Dad walked past my door and stopped. He looked in. Looked at the crib. Then at me. He didn't say anything. Just nodded, once like a man who'd finally admitted to himself the son was real. Then he walked away. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. But it was a start. The next morning, there was a box on the kitchen table. No note. Just a cardboard box with a slightly dented corner. Inside, a small baby monitor, a bottle warmer, and a single yellow stuffed duck with one eye missing. I didn't ask where it came from. I just held the duck to my chest and cried into its fabric like it was a person. Maybe it wasn't a declaration. But in our family, where words had dried up, small actions were all we had left. It was a Tuesday when the social workers showed up. I hadn't expected it. No one had warned me. No phone call, no heads up. Just a firm knock on the door at 11:07 a.m., right after I'd managed to get my swollen ankles up on the couch and finally breathe for a second. Mom opened the door. I was in the next room and could only hear muffled words at first, her voice tight and formal, then a stranger's calm tone in response. Then silence. "Riley," Mom called, her voice flat. "Someone's here to talk to you." "Talk to me?" I came around the corner and saw a woman in a gray blazer, holding a clipboard and a gentle smile. She didn't look judgmental, she looked tired, like someone who'd had too many uncomfortable conversations with too many scared girls. She introduced herself, said she was from Family Support Services, that they were checking in due to my age and my domestic environment. I already hated how that sounded. Mom hovered in the hallway while we talked in the living room. The social worker asked if I was safe, if I felt supported, if I was planning to raise the baby at home. I said yes. Yes. And yes? She nodded a lot. Jotted notes. Said things like, "That's good, and we just want to make sure you and the baby are okay." But I knew why she was really there. I knew that someone, a teacher, a doctor, someone at the hospital, had flagged my file. 18, pregnant, living with visibly distant parents? Of course they were concerned. Anyone would be. Part of me wanted to scream, "Where were you months ago?" When I was eating cold mashed potatoes on the floor. When my father walked past me like I didn't exist. But I said nothing. Just smiled thinly and answered all her questions. She left after 30 minutes. Said I could call her if anything changed. She handed me a business card with a faded corner and walked out the door like she hadn't just peeled back a layer I was barely keeping together. I went back to my room, shut the door and stared at the crib. I sat on the floor beside it and cried into my palms, not from fear, from the unbearable weight of pretending everything was okay when it very obviously wasn't. Later that night, Dad brought in a bag of groceries and placed them on the counter. Usually he'd just leave them and walk out. But this time he paused. "There's cereal in there," he said, eyes not meeting mine. "The kind you used to like." I nodded. "Thanks." It was stupid. Just cereal. But it felt like someone had cracked the door open a quarter-inch, and I could finally see a sliver of light. I asked him quietly, "Did you know the social worker was coming?" He nodded once. "Did you tell them to?" "No," he said. "But someone did. Probably the doctor." Then he added, "They're doing their job." I wanted to ask, "And what about yours?" But I didn't. Instead, I asked something that had been eating at me for months. "Do you even want to be a grandparent?" He looked at me finally. Really looked. And then he said something I never expected. "I don't know. It should have hurt." It did hurt. But the honesty of it after so much silence felt almost like a gift. "I didn't know how to be a dad," he said, voice low. "I was scared back then. And I guess I'm scared now." I nodded slowly. "Me too." We stood there like that, in the kitchen that used to be warm and loud and familiar, both of us unsure how to move forward. Two people who loved the same past, but didn't know how to live in the present together. Before he left the room, he said, "I didn't mean to disappear on you." "I know," I said. "But you did." He paused, hand on the doorframe. "I'm trying," he said. I didn't say anything back. I didn't know what trying meant anymore. But maybe trying was better than nothing. That weekend, Mom asked if I wanted to go to the consignment shop downtown. They had baby stuff on clearance, she said. Cribs, strollers, clothes. I looked at her like she'd grown a second head. She said, "You don't have to. I just thought maybe we could start figuring things out." We didn't talk much on the drive. She kept her eyes on the road, and I kept glancing at my reflection in the window, my swollen face, the way my belly pressed against the seatbelt, the girl I barely recognized. At the shop, she helped me pick out a used diaper bag and some soft flannel blankets. We didn't talk about the birth plan. We didn't mention names. But when she offered to pay for everything without hesitation, I said thank you, and she said, "Of course." It was the closest thing we'd had to a normal day since September. That night, I lay on my side, one hand cradling my stomach, and whispered to Junie, "They're trying. It's messy, but they're trying." She kicked in response once, then again. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to do every single thing alone. The baby shower wasn't my idea. Lexi pushed for it. She said I deserved to feel celebrated, even if it was just a handful of people in someone's backyard eating cupcakes from a plastic tray. "You're bringing a whole human into the world," she said. "You deserve more than awkward silences and prenatal vitamins." I didn't argue. I was too tired to argue. She hosted it at her aunt's house. A warm, slightly cluttered place with fairy lights strung across the porch and a big table filled with store-brand soda, pastel balloons, and dollar store decorations that said, "Welcome baby," in 3 different fonts. I didn't expect anyone from my family to show up. So when Mom walked in with a bag full of diapers and wipes and a gift receipt tucked carefully into the card, I almost forgot how to breathe. She wore her nicest blouse, the one she usually saved for church, and had even put on lipstick. Her face looked tight and unsure, but she came anyway. She even hugged Lexi and complimented the cupcakes. It was awkward, yes, but it was something. When I opened her gift, I found a small frame inside already filled. A sonogram photo. My sonogram photo, the one I thought had disappeared from the table weeks ago. She'd saved it. Behind the picture was a folded note. Not a card, not a store-bought message. Just her handwriting on lined paper. I didn't read it there. I couldn't. Later that night, I unfolded it in my room. It said, "I didn't know how to be your mother when you became a mother." That's not an excuse. Just the truth. I'm scared too. But I want to learn. Love, Mom. I read it twice. 3 times. Then I placed it on the nightstand next to the duck with the missing eye. I didn't cry. Not right then. But something softened. Dad still hadn't said anything more about the baby. He didn't come to the shower. Didn't ask how it went. But a few days later, I found him in the garage, fixing something on the workbench he never really used. He looked up when I walked in. Then back down. You'll need a car seat, he said. I know. I'll pay for a good one, he added. Not second-hand. I nodded. Thanks. He didn't look at me. But he didn't have to. That was his way. He didn't say the words I wanted, but he was building something slow, clumsy, full of splinters, but real. I still had moments where the loneliness came in waves. At night mostly. When the house was too quiet. When Junie pressed her tiny heel against my ribs and I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe, couldn't stop imagining what life would look like in a week or 2 or 5. Would my parents fall in love with her? Would they pretend again? Would I let them? I didn't know. But I knew she was coming. Whether they were ready or not. Whether I was ready or not. And maybe, just maybe, we'd figure it out together. She came early. Not dramatically early, just enough to send the plan spinning. One Tuesday morning I woke to a strange rhythm in my lower belly, a pressure I couldn't quite place. At first I thought it was nothing. Braxton Hicks again. False alarms. But within an hour I couldn't walk without stopping. Breathe without counting. Talk without holding the edge of the kitchen sink and gritting my teeth. Mom was the one who drove me to the hospital. She didn't speak much, just kept one hand on the wheel and one eye flicking between the road and my face. But when a contraction hit so hard I grabbed the car door and whimpered, she reached across the console and squeezed my hand and didn't let go for the next 5 minutes. At the hospital, things moved fast. Monitors. Gowns. IVs. Everything white and bright and cold. I thought I'd be afraid, but all I could think about was her. Junie. I just wanted her safe. She arrived just after midnight. 6 pounds, 1 ounce. A little pink creature with a scream that filled every inch of the delivery room. I cried the second I saw her. Not the kind of crying I'd done for months, not the quiet, controlled ache I carried like a stone. This was something else. Something clean and painful and beautiful all at once. They placed her on my chest and she blinked slowly like she already knew who I was. Like she'd been listening to every whispered apology and promise I'd made to her through skin and silence. She's perfect, the nurse said softly. And she was. The first night was the hardest. She cried more than I expected. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache. My mind kept racing with thoughts I didn't have time to feel. But at some point, while I rocked her in the stiff hospital chair and hummed a tune I hadn't thought about since childhood, I looked up and saw Mom standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She just came in, took Junie gently from my arms and held her like it was muscle memory. She swayed, just slightly, and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. Then she said, "You did good." I think that was the moment something broke loose inside me, something I didn't know I'd been holding in so tightly. I looked away because I couldn't hold eye contact. Not when the words felt heavier than I could carry. But I whispered, "Thanks." And she whispered back, "We'll figure it out." Dad didn't come to the hospital until the 3rd day. He brought flowers. A wrinkled brown paper bag with takeout. A folded blue blanket I recognized from the attic, one I'd used as a baby with frayed edges and stitched clouds. He stood at the edge of the room, awkward, unsure. Then he said, "Can I hold her?" I nodded. He sat beside the bed and cradled Junie like she was glass. His hands, the same hands that built fences and fixed engines, shook slightly. He didn't say anything poetic or grand. He just whispered, "Hi there, little one. I'm your grandpa." And in that moment, I let it be enough. It's been 4 weeks since we came home. Life is still hard. My body is still healing. The nights are still long. But the house is warmer now. Softer. Mom makes tea while I rock Junie. Dad grumbles about baby wipes being overpriced. We're not a perfect family, we never were. But we're no longer pretending nothing happened. Sometimes that's all healing is. Not forgetting. Just finally admitting it mattered. I still whisper to Junie when the house goes quiet. But now sometimes someone whispers back.